Good day everyone, bonjour tout le monde. This is Roger Chabot. And welcome in Italy on the Sacco River. 100 meters behind me is the location of a tragic event that happened in May 1944. And the discoveries we're about to make will be the resource material to create a painting that would help preserve our military legacy. When you're in camera, you do better. I'm standing in the Sacco River right now, and this river is set between the town of Castro de Volci and PEUT. It was actually the boundary for the operational sector. On this side in front of me was the Canadian sector for the 1st Canadian Corps, and actually the 5th Armored Division. And behind me is the French Expeditionary Corps. And the soldiers that were closest to the boundary were known as the Goumiers, were from Morocco. And these men were like fierce warriors that had no pity for anybody and showed no quarters and took no prisoners. And they acted the same way with the civilian population as they did with the people they fought. There are some tragic events that happened in this area at the bank of this river that had a lasting effect for the local people. And this is the story that we're going to bring to you.
My name is Paolo Sbarbata. I am an historical researcher from Frosinone. For many years, I have become passionate on many events of the Second World War, particularly those concerning the Canadian contingent in the liberation of Italy. I had the opportunity to interview and hear firsthand the experience and the story narrated by Professor Antonio Grazio Ferraro, who, in May of 1944, was displaced with his family right in this zone, near the railway station of Castro de Volci, just a few kilometers from the towns of Castro de Volci and PEUT. Professor Ferraro wrote a book recounting his memories of the war, including a tragic and dramatic event that he personally witnessed when finding himself displaced in this location with his family. When I asked Professor Ferraro to share with me in more detail his war experiences, he graciously invited me several times to his home in the city of Cassino, where he recounted with intense emotions several events. A particular episode occurred in the end of May 1944 in the territory of Castro de Volci, in the vicinity of the railway station and a short distance from the Sacco River and the bridge known as the Ponte della Mola. A young local girl and sexually violated by a group of Moroccan soldiers known as Goumiers. These brutal acts of violence were witnessed by several local people who were forced to watch under the assailants' threat. Sadly, there were many similar episodes that occurred in the territory of Castro de Volci and the Liri Valley, with even more tragic consequences. Only because of the intervention by the Canadian military police stationed in PEUT under the command of Captain Tony Scotti were additional tragic consequences avoided for the entire civilian population. A local resident, Mrs. Olivetta Molinari, is photographed here with Captain Scotti, a few meters from her home, very near the camp where in June of 1944, the Canadians had their encampment, which included the provision of services and protection for the local civilian population. Another direct witness, Mrs. Lucia Biondi, personally confirmed to me the episode about the violence inflicted on the helpless young girl right in front of the residence of the Tellini. Mrs. Biondi who was very young at the time, knew the assaulted girl and was present at the scene when the girl's mother comforted her and rendered first aid to her traumatized and bleeding daughter. On several occasions, Lucia met the Canadian soldiers, appreciating them for their humanity, kindness, and courtesy. All this historical research and interviews I gathered over a lengthy period are part of an historical photographic report, which I have personally donated copies to the town administration and all the local witnesses and collaborators who have helped me throughout my research. I hope that this historical documentation helps us recognize, remember, and honor acts of bravery and humanity towards innocent fellow human beings, and to help current and future generations understand the sacrifices and the sufferings of our people and our land.
At noon, from the hill descending from Castro toward the Sacco River, we saw a flood of soldiers coming down, shooting and shouting. We climbed onto the farmhouse terrace to get a better view. They took no prisoners, but killed all the Germans they found, entered the farmers' houses, raped all the women, and looted anything valuable they could find. The next day, again at noon, we witnessed the same scene as the previous day. But this time they were drunk and probably under the influence of hallucinogens. They crossed the Sacco River in large numbers, invaded the entire area up to the railway, and committed so many heinous acts of violence. They took the women, dragged them out of their homes, and under the threat of weapons, raped them. They chose the most beautiful and the youngest, and raped them all. It wasn't over yet. In fact, 3 Moroccan soldiers pointed their guns at my father, my brother Carmelo, and me, forcing us to follow them. They took us to a nearby house, and under the threat of weapons, forced us to witness the inhumane, despicable, and violent act they were about to commit. With us were many locals, men, elderly women, and many children. They took a mattress from the house, laid it out in the courtyard, and dragged out a girl who must have been 15 or 16 years old, and violently threw her onto the mattress. Then they raped her. 10, 20, 30, all on the small body of the girl who was screaming. They were animals, dressed as soldiers. At a certain point, the rapists all fled because they heard the sound of a military vehicle approaching. They left us and the girl completely naked on the mattress. Her eyes wide open, she modestly placed her hands over her pubic area, then turned onto her side, curled up and covered in blood. A military truck arrived, carrying a driver and 2 white officers who were therefore French nationals. They got out of the jeep and curious approached us. To our complaints and accusations, they simply responded, "C'est la guerre, c'est la guerre." It's war. It's war.
So, in despair of what happened, a young man, 16 years old, Antonio Grazio Ferraro, and his brother seek to find a patrol of Canadian soldiers and explain what had happened. And the 2 brothers were escorted to the headquarters of the town of PEUT, and this is where they met Captain Tony Scotti. And after explaining the situation of those brutal incidents that happened, Captain Scotti asked them to spend the night there, and as he was going to investigate the situation the very next morning. Captain Scotti loaded a truckload of Canadian Provost and came with them on the bank of the river to investigate the situation. Lo and behold, as they were deploying on the bank of the river, they could hear screams and shouting from the other side of the river, and the Goumiers were on their way back to do more rampage. So Captain Scotti tried to explain to them that they were not welcome on the Canadian side of the river, and told them not to cross. But they seemed to want to ignore his warnings, at the point that he had to fire some warning shots. At this time, the surprised Goumiers became really mad and attempted to cross the river. And it's at this precise moment that those provosts aligned on the bank of the river opened fire and killed a number of them and wounded several others. And the Goumiers picked up their wounded, went back to the wooded area, and they were never to be seen again. Anyway, not in this location in Italy.
Now, all this plunder and raping went on, especially in this area, where these French colonials were. But many people always talk about Moroccans, Moroccans, Moroccans. They were Moroccans, Tunisians, Algerians, and Senegalese. So they were cannon fodder. And as long as they kept going, the officers didn't give a damn. There was one incident further down from here where a mother went to complain about her child being raped, and the officer, the French officer, lined them up. This is a place called Villa Santo Stefano, which is further down the road. And the officer, I don't know what was right with him that day, he lined them up and he said, which one was it? The mother showed him, the guy went up and shot him in the head. His own men. So when they were here, they had to rest because they would fight, march, and these guys were all shepherds from the mountains, Northern Africa. For them, marching in the mountains was normal. And my mother's family was over in that direction, while my father's family was way up on the top.
He never spoke about the war, never told us what went on. So what was interesting with my dad, very secretive man, okay. My sister and I then realized that my dad lived a life during the war that we did not understand and did not know about. He never told us all the good he had done here. It's other people that have told us. He did take us up to PEUT, which for him was a very important town because that's where his headquarters were. It was high on a mountain, and he had, it's now the mayor's office. And he sat there and he could look out these two windows and see exactly what was going on all around him all the time. So for him as the military police, it was important. We did not know about until then, but he's being recognized, and it's, in a way, it's so unfortunate he's not around anymore. But then he's such a private person, I don't even know if he would have come to something like this to be recognized, because for him it was personal, and and he didn't talk about it. So,
like most veterans
of the Second World War,
yeah.
I bet you there's a lot of unsung heroes out there that did so much, so that afforded us our life. Like, we're so lucky to live the life we live, and I think we need to thank the heroes of the Second World War. And I think everybody is a hero. Anybody that boot to the ground, I mean, for me, they lived through circumstances that I'll never understand or comprehend totally. And my dad, when he heard that, as I said, my dad was very big on human rights and protecting the underdog, for sure. And he made sure that his troops were behind him on this. We only really found out about one of the things he did during this trip was at the river yesterday, where they had the plaque, where they stopped the troops and they killed the offending troops to make sure that these women were protected as best they could.
Right.
You know, I'm sure he wasn't able to protect everybody, but the ones that he was able to protect and save they have a very long memory, and their families have a long memory. And what I find interesting is, even though the older generation is dying off, younger people are remembering this and keeping this alive. I have to say, from the bottom of my heart, it's an honor for me and for us that my dad be recognized, and that when you drive around this region, there are so many people that remember my dad, and there's the plaques and the memorials, and it's a big honor for us that Tony is being remembered this way. It's very nice.
All those many interviews that we have recorded and walking through the grounds where the story happened served as invaluable resource material to create the painting Sanctuary. And I chose the title Sanctuary because those poor people were taking refuge or sanctuary in the Canadian sector, hoping to be safe for the barbaric acts of violence of those rogue Moroccan soldiers. Well, what I'm thinking, based on what we've seen on the ground here, because there's this bridge that we've been. This bridge is very significant because that would have been the road that Tony Scotti with his provost coming from Puffy would be driving on. So they would have dismounted their trucks and jeeps probably close to the bridge. And the field, what I was told by Francesco earlier, is that back in those days there was no trees, there was no bushes, and the slope was more gentle. So imagine, I'm trying to imagine that if we see here a gentle slope going down toward the river bank, the way I visualize it is that either we would have the trucks of the bridge, and we would have the troops dismounted along the bank of the river, ready to stop anything, or the Goumiers or those Moroccans coming from the other side of the river. Really, they were really close. When they shot, they were at close range. Military police at this time, they were armed with revolvers and with Thompson machine guns. So it would make sense that those military police would have been deployed along the bank of the river, and when they fired at those Goumiers, they were close range. What I know is that the event happened in midday, like end of morning. It was probably a very bright day. So we're gonna try to do the painting so we represent the time of the day as well. So I want to give you the number one of one. As the war artist and producer of Sanctuary, I want to thank everyone who participated in this beautiful project, as well as our wonderful sponsors who supported us financially. Let me remind you that it would be impossible for us to create those projects without your generosity and commitment to be guardians of the memory. Thanks for watching. For Bravery in Arms War Artist Series, this is Roger Chabot. Till we meet again, Custos Memoria.